Can we start by talking a little bit about just your musical background? I mean, how did you start playing drums and how did you start improvising?
Wow, yeah, that's actually, I started really young. I started when I was 3 years old because my dad was a musician, and so there was a drum set at our place. And there's a doorbell ringing. So I just have to one second. I'm not going to open, but yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, so I started, like I said, really young when I was 3 years old, and drum set at our place. So started banging it, having no idea what I was doing, but um, I think I got serious playing drums when I was around, I guess, around 12. Before that, I was just doing everything by ear, just playing along to records, and uh, as good or as bad as I could. I don't know. So going from there, started taking lessons and got a little bit more serious, and started practicing actually for the first time, like really, doing like your exercises and stuff like that. Did that for a couple of years, and then I went to the conservatory and studied jazz drums when I was I think I was 17, and that was actually also the first time I got like really in contact with like improvised music in a way, like the jazz kind of like improvisation, not the free improvisation. So yeah, and let me think. I did that for a couple of years. Loved it, just playing jazz and feeling some kind of freedom in that kind of music. And then afterwards, I was still living in the Netherlands back then. Um, did my jazz gigs, but kind of felt stuck in a way, but didn't know exactly what it was. So started looking around for different kinds of music, and I got in contact with the scene here in Cologne, where I live right now, and that basically became pretty clear, like, okay, this is something I'm really interested in, different kind of playing, different, much more open approach than I was used to. And it got from like this more traditional kind of jazz playing to like more modern kind of jazz playing. And then pretty soon I got in contact with like the, let's say, like the more free kind of improv scene here in Germany and in Cologne specifically. And sometimes, I don't know if you guys recognize that, but for me it was, you have like these dreams as a kid, and you grow up and you start playing, and at a certain point you're playing with like the people that you always dreamed of playing with. and and I remember like literally sitting on stage with like some of these people and looking around and thinking, I should be happy right now. Why am I not? Like kind of like this super weird kind of thing. And to get back to the Cologne phase in my life, which I'm still in, is kind of when I was here, I did a jam session with some people, free improvisers. That was basically the first time I really, really played completely free. And that was exactly the opposite. I felt like, oh my God, this is it. I was never as happy as I was before. It was really amazing. And that was kind of the first time it just blew my mind to play like that. And I was lucky enough to play immediately with like amazing improvisers here in Germany. So that was yeah, and from there it just went on. Just checking out this music, checking out different players, playing with different people. Yeah, so basically starting as a pop drummer, going to jazz, going to free improv. Yeah. So yeah.
So, how did your ventures into extended snare drum begin? And if you could define what an extended snare drum is, that would also be great.
Sure. I can even show you. It's here, so I'll do it in a minute. But well, I also studied 2 years classical percussion in Amsterdam, and already back then I kind of practiced snare drum all day long. All the other stuff like timpani and marimba and vibraphone and stuff, I liked it, but I don't know, my ear just went always back to snare drum. I just love that sound. I love that instrument. And when I was playing, um, still kind of like, it started actually in Cologne, I think, when I was still doing like more like modern jazz kind of things. Um, I kind of, I like minimalism in general, kind of like, you know, easy. And so I started to take away stuff from the drum set. And the first thing was, yeah, okay, let's take some cymbals away and, you know, just play with one cymbal. And I still kind of was looking, and at a certain point I checked the drum set and I was looking at it and I thought like, wow, the drum head of the snare drum is like completely black and used. Like the toms are completely white and brand new. So it was kind of like pretty clear. I never use them. I everything I hear comes basically from snare drum and cymbals and bass drum and stuff like that. But I could use the toms. I could just, you know, leave at home. Did that, and then I remember the big game changer for me was actually when I was driving to a concert with Sebastian Grams, which is an amazing bass player here in Cologne. And we're just talking about like musicians that are special and what makes them special. And he said like, yeah, I don't know, for me it's kind of like these decisions that musicians make. And I said like, okay, what do you mean? Can you give an example? And he said like, yeah, imagine you get a call for a bebop gig, you know, and you say yes, and the next day you show up with only a cymbal. And the first thing would be like, oh man, also the reaction of the others, like, what is he going to do with only a cymbal? You know, you're going to play bebop, you know, you need a snare drum and you need a hi-hat, and et cetera, et cetera. And he said, but imagine that everything you hear in a bebop setting, you can do on this cymbal. That would be amazing. And that would be absolutely like, you know, a game changer for that gig. And I thought about it afterwards, and I thought like, I guess that could be actually what I'm hearing all the time when I play. I hear the snare drum, more or less. And from then on, I just took like a very big decision to just do it. So every gig from then on, I showed up with only a snare drum, basically. And I remember the first thing was actually a recording in the studio, and I showed up with only a snare drum. And this guy looked at me like, are you insane? That's not, you know. And I was like, oh my God, why did I do this? But we recorded, he said like, okay, let's just do the first piece and we'll see. And we did the first piece and it worked out perfectly and he was super happy. So yeah, that kind of confirmed for me that it can work. And it went from there. And then I started preparing the snare drum a little bit more, and by mistake I kind of I think it's kind of like a funny story, because the extended snare drum basically came from, I wanted a second snare bed underneath of the snare drum, but I basically have like, I don't know how I say that in English, but in Dutch you would say like, I have two left hands, so I can't build anything basically, but I tried to do it myself. So didn't do it right, but for some reason the second snare bed, when I put tension on it, it got over the hoop, and that gave like this enormous kind of like reverb kind of sound. And so by accident I kind of discovered this amazing almost church-like reverb sound that was actually just acoustically produced. And so that's actually how that part started. And meanwhile, now I can show it basically. I have a drum built by this amazing snare drum builder from Italy. And he built, let me show you, basically like that. I don't know if you can see it, but it has 3 snare beds. So this is like the classic one, which is like super tight and just straight strings. This is like a normal one. And this one, as you can see it, it's not on the drum head. I don't know if you can see it, but that's just the reverb. How do you say that? Snare bed, basically. And everything else is just a normal snare drum. So the most extended part is basically underneath it. It's just the extra sounds, and this gives me a whole different. So this one gives me a whole different sound compared to that one, and this is basically reverb, but I put a bridge on it, and if I don't have the bridge, it just sounds like a normal snare drum. If I put a bridge on it, which is, I have it here, like a normal kind of thing, you know, you have a huge reverb as if you're playing in a church, right? So that's kind of what makes it the extended kind of snare drum in that kind of way. Yeah. So yeah, but it all started basically by accident and just trying to build my own kind of ideas onto a snare drum. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that something like the reverb? Is that something you can control quickly? Like, can you change it, or do you have to take the time between, like, when there's a pause in the music? I'm just wondering, like, logistically, how it works.
Well, as when the bridge is on, it's on. So the only thing I can control it is by hand, really dampening the strings or the snares at that point. But I can't change the bridge that fast. That needs to be a little break at least. So I have several bridges which have all a different kind of color, sound color, but I need a little bit of time to do that. I mean, with a little bit of time, I mean like 10 seconds or something, but in music that can be a really long time. So yeah, so there needs to be a break. Yeah.
I'm just curious, as a sort of a sidebar, what kind of recording session was that you brought just the snare drum to for the first time? Like, what kind of music was that?
That was actually, I would say, kind of like a free jazz kind of approach. So there were melodies played by. It was also written by a saxophone player, and so it was not the bebop gig I said before or something. It was like, it was free, and but it was more like a free jazz kind of approach. So that kind of like gig. Yeah. So
it wasn't totally like outlandish for you to just bring a snare drum for that.
No. I think I was also thinking about it, like, you know, playing a bebop gig or something with just a snare drum. I think I wouldn't have dared it back then. Now I'm doing it because not bebop, but I'm in this this band with Sebastian Grams, this bass player, and Rudy Mahal. I don't know if you know him, this bass clarinet player. And that's basically still very jazz, like melodies and form and stuff like that. And we made the decision now I made the decision to also in that band only play snare drum. So right now that was the last band where I played drum set, and I made the decision to also skip the drum set there and play only the snare drum, which is kind of cool because it was always a trio and now it became a quartet with Axel Dörner, the trumpet player. He's joining us because he's kind of like the in between. He can play jazz, and he can play like all the like noise, sound, kind of improvisation things. So yeah.
How did you get connected with Adrian to make this drum? Did you commission it?
Well, yeah, you could say I commissioned it, but it was you know, he's like this snare drum guru. You know, I always heard about him, and he's building all these snare drums for like the big symphony orchestras, and there's this ensemble Musikfabrik here in Cologne, and I know that the percussionist very well, and he has two of his drums, and I played them, and they're absolutely amazing. And I thought, like, okay, some point in my life, I need to have a snare drum of his. And I just wrote him and I sent him some videos of my work, and I asked him if he would be interested in building a drum. And he immediately replied, like, yeah, how can I say no to this? This is like, you know, I have to experiment with that. And so so I commissioned it, but he was totally into it, and he still is. This is like a prototype that I have right now, which already I'm super happy with. I have no idea what he should change, but if I want something changed, he builds a second one, basically with some new ideas. Yeah. So yeah.
So how has your, I guess, extended snare drum playing since the happy accident that you had of figuring out the reverb situation? Like, since then, how has your snare drum playing evolved and your musical ideas evolved? Because also, as out of that, did you have plans for this custom snare drum, or I'm just wondering how that worked together?
Well, my playing changed a lot because I started thinking more about how to use this only one instrument basically, and how to get different sounds out of it. And the first one of the first things I kind of, which has basically nothing to do with like the new snare drum or anything, but one of the first things I was interested in was, as a percussionist, you're so used to use vertical motions, right? Because you're always basically hitting some stuff. And I got like totally interested in really using the surface, so the drum head itself. So using much more horizontal movements, circular movements, and figuring out what that would do sound-wise. So basically working with friction a lot. And so in the middle of the top drum head, I also have like a thin line of rosin. So I can do stuff with that, with cymbals and stuff like that. But also what one of the things that I found is that I can play melodies on the snare drum. And because at certain points, I don't know exactly how it works, but at certain points on the drum, you get specific pitches. So if I use like a super rub, which is basically just a plastic stick plus like a little rubber ball on top, and if I use the plastic stick and just make a small circular motion on certain spots, I get on a 15-inch snare drum, I get always like the same pitches. I get an A flat, C, D flat, E flat, G flat. So I can play basically with those 5 notes, I can play these melodies depending on where I play this mini circular motion basically. And that's one of the things that I'm totally fascinated by right now. Like really having the possibility as a drummer, as a percussionist, to play melodies without changing or having a million instruments, but just having this one instrument and being able to work with like melody and also harmony, because I can also, depending on the pressure I use with the fingers, or also play with left and right hand, I can play also 2 pitches or have multiphonics and stuff like that. So basically, in a certain kind of way, I also get harmonies. So all of a sudden, this whole world opened up for me, from rhythm to harmony and melody, which was always there, of course. I mean, you also have melody and harmony when you play drums in a certain kind of way, but it all of a sudden it became so literal, and I could really play that kind of stuff. So that was so it changed in a way, like very in a very big way. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So
Can
yeah.
you talk a little bit about the various implements that you use on the snare drum? Like, how do you think about building your language and vocabulary through the, yeah, I mean, you use everything but a drumstick, right?
Yeah, I also use drumsticks, but I try again. I kind of like to, again, to have this a minimalist approach. I started out with like a million things, you know. So I had the snare drum, and then around it was like I don't know how many tools there were, you know. So I tried to reduce that. So I'm using like normal drumsticks right now. I use like a normal timpani mallet. And I think like 4 different kinds of other mallets, which are different in like how hard they are, which changes the attack. And then I have these super rubs, which I basically only use for these melodies. Then I use tenor sax reeds, which on the rosin are pretty amazing because you get all these overtones, and the friction is, again, you can play melodies, but you also have this super noisy kind of like white noise kind of sound. So yeah, you have like the noise pitch relation is kind of like super interesting in that kind of improvisation, or that kind of sound. And then I'm using let me think. Yeah, and then I use like a normal kind of China symbol, and that's about it. So it's not that much anymore, actually. And I try to do everything with basically that and just pressure points, also with my fingers. So with the stick, I can also play melodies when I put my finger on certain spots on the drum. So I basically don't want to bring too much stuff, but try to figure out how much I can get with less stuff. So yeah, that's what I'm totally interested in right now. I don't want to, you know, bring a ton of material, but really checking out like, okay, when I only have a drumstick and my snare drum, what can I do? And that's also what I practice. So yeah.
Yeah, I recently came across your recording. Is it called Luft? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
the solo recording, which I think is a great example of those overtones you were just talking about.
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you can talk a little bit about the preparation for that and the implements. I think those are I can't tell if it's plastic or metal that you're using, and there are these little discs on the drum head. I'm wondering if you can talk about what those do.
Yeah. So actually there I'm using the tenor reeds, which is like the fiber reeds, which I think, I'm not sure, but I think all saxophone players hate them. But I love them because on the drum they sound amazing. So that's really great. But and the small metal discs in the middle, they basically just dampen the drum a little bit. So I get a lot more air sound when I use it instead of like the whole drum resonating. So so like these little details, just putting those discs in the middle of the drum changes the character of the sound. It's less open and it's more dense, and so even there I can, even with the airy sounds, because I'm not playing in the middle too much, so I start off on the edges. You basically have like this disguised kind of melody in it, because you have lower notes and higher notes and stuff like that. So and you basically get that more clear when I use the discs in the middle. If I would take them away, you would have a much more like you would still have the air sound, but you would hear the drum a lot more. So it would kind of disguise this melody too much, and you would only hear like stuff like that and hardly anything else. So yeah.
And is that piece like completely improvised? Is it a structured improvisation, or was it more or less a planned piece at the point you recorded it?
It's basically completely improvised. I just sat down and played it. The only thing was I did like a concert with Nate Woolley, and I've been playing with a lot of trumpet players lately, also with Axel Durner and people like that. And I don't know, I just love trumpet. I love what they can do with their instruments, and also playing with Nate just was super inspiring. And I just wanted to improvise a piece that was basically based a little bit on the sounds that I got from them, the inspiration that I got from them, and so with them in the back of my mind, I just sat down and started improvising, and that came out basically. Yeah. So yeah.
Do you ever, for example, you gave that piece a title. Would you sit down and play it again in a very similar way, or is it different every single time? I mean, when you improvise, does it kind of form into a piece over a period of time when you keep playing with the same ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't change too much. I think, I mean, that's something I think about a lot when you talk about free improvisation. First of all, the freedom for me is not in the musical material. Also, it's also in the musical material, but it's most of all the freedom to be myself. And so, and in the end, also when I listen to like, people that I really think are an inspiration, and that I think are amazing musicians, they usually don't have a million sounds. They have like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 sounds that they can do everything they want with that and form these amazing kind of structures and forms musically. So even if they improvise freely, in the end, there's a form and a structure that makes sense. So it is a musical piece. So if I would do it again, and for me, that piece kind of makes sense, I would still have kind of like the same approach. I wouldn't say like, okay, I write it down and I play it exactly as I did on that recording. But like form wise, I would probably kind of do the same thing. So start with the edges and go to the middle and stuff like that. So yeah, so it would be not exactly the same because it depends on the day, but more or less the same approach, I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you walk us through your practice routine? Like when you're practicing, are you always experimenting? Are you really driven to accomplish specific things, or maybe it depends on what kind of gigs you have coming up?
I don't only practice experimental stuff because, for example, right now I'm in this trio tone, it's called, and Christian Wolf, he wrote a piece for us, so I have to practice that. So it's like literally, you know, putting sheet music in front of me and practice it. And it's the same for I work with some composers. I just did or am doing a piece with Viola, which I'm going to perform on May 28th. And so also there is a lot of work to do. I have to check certain things, and so sometimes it just depends. It depends on what's coming up, like concert wise, and so sometimes it's just based on pieces, and but if I don't have any pieces for like a couple of months or anything, I really try to focus on being first of all on my sounds, really having control over the instrument, which is I think let me get one step back. When I was studying jazz, I was kind of like, I didn't get free improvised music. You know, I was one of these people that thought like, okay, you know, a 3-year-old can do that. You know, that's easy. You just sit down and you just mess around, and it's somehow, for some people, that makes sense. Now I'm kind of like the opposite. Now I'm, you know, I've grown up, I would say, as a musician, and I kind of know now, like, oh wow, that means if I really want to be a good improviser, I need to have total control over my instrument. I need to have so much knowledge about music. So that's what I practice. I practice control over the instrument, control over all these extended techniques, but also control over musicality. So trying to play improvisations, maybe with certain kind of form structures in my head, just to try how that works or not, and stuff like that. Or also like these certain musical parameters like dynamics, and which is especially with extended techniques not always so easy. So really trying to figure out how to do that, but also try to figure out what musical effect these things can have, like dynamics. And it's something we all grow up with, like, oh yeah, dynamics, I have to use dynamics. But to really think about it, it's yeah, that's pretty intense to figure out what that actually can do, especially also in my solo stuff, in my solo program. I'm playing with others, like the snare drum it's still a drum, so it can be super loud. So, you know, how do you deal with that? How can you play super soft, and what effect does that have sound wise and musically? So I try to still work a lot on my musicality, because I think that's the hardest thing. And like I said, really try to have total control over all these sounds and extended techniques. And I still practice like snare etudes, like literally like classical percussion, you know, going back to having my hands fit, and, you know, also play with sticks correctly and not lose that, because it's still something I use. And I think it's, I still also like that, like the normal kind of snare drum playing. It can also be amazing. So yeah.
Do you still play jazz at all?
Well, not in a traditional kind of way, at least not at concerts. I teach at a conservatory in the Netherlands, and I'm basically the main teacher for jazz and improvisation. So it's still a part of what I teach, and it's where I come from. A big part of my musical life was jazz. So So I do play it when I teach, um, and but not at concerts. It doesn't really work for me in a way that I really, I don't know if it's based on character or something, but for me it works when I really make like a clear decision. Okay, like this is what I'm gonna do, and I don't want to do and jazz and free improvised music and pop music. And I don't know, I have the feeling from for myself, I can't talk for others, but for me, I have the feeling that I'm losing depth in what I'm doing, and the more I focus on one thing, the more I can dig into it, and I think the better it gets. So right now I'm not playing drums anymore, but who knows? Maybe in 5 years I have two bass drums, 20 toms, and a million cymbals again. No idea, you know. So yeah, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your teaching? I mean, do you work with the students at your conservatory on this style of improvisation in addition to their jazz language? And how do you approach getting them to sort of open their mind into the sound possibilities?
Mm. I definitely try to do that, and but I also try to, you know, figure out if they're interested in it at all. I mean, I don't want to force anything onto them, you know. So it's for me, it's um, especially in the first couple of semesters, they kind of, they're still interested in playing drums, you know, and so I'm kind of careful with that. But I have some ensembles that I'm teaching where this is the main focus. So every student can basically choose that ensemble and work with me for like one or two semesters or even longer on those kind of things. And that's not only drum related. So that can basically every instrumentalist can take lessons with me, and we just figure out how you can work with sound and maybe different approaches to the instrument, and improvise music, how, you know, improvise together, talk about it a lot, stuff like that. But especially with the drummers, it's about, first of all, it's about really, you know, playing drums and going from there in a way. It's also a lot about talking about it, and I think they all get that, you know, playing a style of music that's like 60, 70, 80 years old is cool to learn, but doesn't make sense for most of them to keep doing it exactly that way. So they all are kind of searching, like, to find new ways of playing jazz or whatever you want to call it. So they're all interested in different kinds of sounds, and so even when they play drum set, they start experimenting with like stacks, so more cymbals on top of each other, or taking the toms away and putting bongos or something there. So they are usually experimenting with sound anyway, and then the further they get, mostly when they're in their third or fourth year or something, so that fifth, sixth semester, then they start to be interested in also extended techniques and stuff like that. So usually they also start to take that ensemble lessons, and what I was talking about. So it's yeah, it basically goes from there. So I don't try to force anything. I just try to show them, you know, all the possibilities that are there. That's what I would try to do in the first year, for sure. You know, I would try to tell them, hey, yeah, that's great, but maybe check also this, and maybe check this. This could be great. Or, and if they say, no, I hated it, fine, you know, no problem. And then maybe 2 years later, they come back to me, and they say, now I love it. I mean, I had that experience. Before I went to the conservatory, I had a teacher. He gave me Miles Davis, My Funny Valentine, and he put it in my hands like a CD. And he said, like, you have to listen to this. I was like, okay, sure, why not? And I remember I put it in the CD player, listened to it, and I thought, like, what the hell is this? You know, I still like a pop drummer, never heard jazz in my life before. I come from a small village in the Netherlands, so no jazz at all. So it was kind of like, what the hell is this? And I took it back and I gave it to him. I said, like, I don't know. You know, Tony Williams on drums, and I just, you know, I didn't get it. And then after I went to the conservatory and started playing jazz, I put that record on again, and it was like, wow, this is like amazing. This is unbelievable. So it happened to me, like I wasn't open to it in the beginning. So yeah, so I try to be careful, and then but tried in a very subtle way. I try to show them that there's more than just one kind of music. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about your recent release with Tone and like the concept of the album and a little bit about your collaborations with the 4 composers on it?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, here in Cologne and close to Cologne, there are several churches that are built by an amazing architect, Gottfried Böhm is his name, and he had his birthday last year, and he got 100 years old. So that was kind of special. And we thought like, okay, we have to do something with that. And the churches, you have to imagine, is like super brutalism. So it's like concrete buildings, like this super weird forms and amazing buildings. So we just wanted to do something in those buildings. And then we were thinking like, okay, what are we going to do? And we thought like, okay, we have to invite musicians that we think are amazing and friends, and so who are going to invite? And we asked Anne LaBerge, Sam Pluta, Nate Woolley, and Madison Greenstone. But then COVID came basically, so they couldn't come over. So we had to change the concept, and we thought like, okay, what if we kind of have them write a piece for us, but not in like writing a piece and like writing like literally the notes that we have to play, but basically concepts, and have them play it or record it. So we have like fixed media that we can just use in those churches. And so we asked them if they wanted to do that, and they all said yes, and that was great. And they had totally different approaches. Like Sam just improvised, and he made like this amazing 15-minute piece just sitting down improvising, and it was great. And Madison really checked out like the churches, and she had like this whole idea about how she could use these spaces, and so for us, completely different approaches came out, and some of them were like, do whatever you want with it, and others were kind of like, okay, this is like the concept that you have to play. And so for us it was super interesting. But then we had the question of, okay, how are we going to play these tapes, these recordings that they made? And so we didn't want to use speakers, so we had these cut off horn bells and talk boxes and tubes just connected to them. And so we basically had their recording through the talk box, through the tube, through the horns into the space, which of course in itself is already completely distorted and super weird. And but in itself a beautiful weird kind of sound. And it worked amazing in all churches, and it was incredible. Every piece in every church was completely different. We were like in there's one is in Nevigus. It's a super small village, not too far from Cologne, and it's Mariendom, which is like a huge church. I mean, if you think about Cologne, you think about the Dome, which is like a huge church, kind of similar, but then in brutalism. So it's like incredibly big, and that was the only church that sounded super small in a kind of like a weird way. And all the other churches were in between. They were not like super big, and it was just incredible the way the sound moves and reflected to us. And so it was basically really working with the space and the recordings that we got from the 4 composers and composers players, and having the fixed media go through cut off horn bells. That's basically what we did, and improvised to it in the end, because I think the only one that really had like literally not literally, but more or less like how do you say that? Like stuff written down that we basically as a concept really needed to do was Nate, when I remember correctly. All the others were basically, just improvised to it, which was amazing. Yeah. And the record actually is we made a double CD out of it, so 2 CDs, because when we listen back to it, like the whole trio, we made like a top 3, like, okay, which is your favorite, the second favorite, third favorite of every piece. So we have 4 pieces. We recorded it in 5 churches, so we have at least like 2 takes of every piece. And we just listened to it and made this top 3. And then we figured out like, hey, this is funny. All of us have on the number 1 of all 4 pieces the same church, which was St. Gertrude here in Cologne. So that was the first album. And then we thought, but it would also be cool to have like a second album with like the other takes that we loved, but just were not on number 1, but they're still really good. So the other CD are basically the same pieces, recorded in different churches, and the result is like it's pretty amazing because it's completely different. It's the same tune, but it's completely different. So
Just to be clear, like I'm just want to make sure I understand how this worked. The composers created fixed media that you then played along with in the churches and recorded that.
yeah.
Okay. So how did you, if the sound was coming out of these horns, like how many of those were around the church? And maybe it varied depending on the church, but like what did the recording setup look like for that?
We had 3 cut-off horn bells, so only 3 basically, and everything was set up in a circle. So it was basically horn bell player, horn bell player, horn bell player. Was it correct? Yeah, at least in a circle, and so it was not that we placed them somewhere in the church. The only thing we did is that we changed sometimes the position. So it wasn't only going to the middle of the circle sometimes, but we took the horn bells and put them up or something, depending on what sounded better. But it was also always in a circle. And and there's one thing that's maybe important, because the bass player and me, we really only had the talk box, and from there it went to the horn bell. But Matthias, who was playing trombone, he has this I don't know how you say that in English, like he can press something on his trombone and it changes the way the air goes through the tubes.
We call that a trigger.
Okay, yeah. And so he used this trigger, and he from there he could choose if the sound would go through his horn or go through the tube to the other horn. So he could kind of move it between the 2 horns. So that was something extra that he could do. And me and the bass player, we just had the 1 horn. That's about it. So the position of the horns was basically set, except for the trombone player, who could choose between his own horn or the cutoff horn. But we're always in a circular motion, or circular setup. That's how I need to say. Yeah. And then we just had the mics. We had like 3 mics in the middle that were kind of directed to us, but pretty far away. And then we had close miking to have, just to be sure that that we don't only have the room, because it was sometimes pretty crazy how it all reflected. And I think if we would have used that only, I think it would be one big chaos. So we kind of mixed afterwards in the mix. We kind of mixed both, like the close miking and the room mics. Yeah. So that was a really special project, I have to say. That was really nice to do. Yeah. And also the funny thing is that afterwards, although we played it like 10 times at least, 5 times, 5 churches at least, every piece 2 times, and we we really wanted to play the pieces with the composers. So we did a concert already now with Nate, and we did a couple of concerts with Anne, and now we're just waiting, or I wanted to say hoping, but I would say now waiting for Madison and Sam to come to Europe again and do concerts with them, because we definitely want to play the pieces live with them, with us. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your project with Viola?
Yeah. With Viola, it's actually interesting because we've known each other now for a couple of years, and she went to a lot of concerts that I played, and she was always interested in this extended snare drum stuff. And then at a certain point, because she's using a lot of electronics also in her work, she got interested in, okay, let's make an extension of the extended snare drum. So let's use electronics, but not but in a way that is still integrated in the drum. So on the top drum head, she's gonna use like a conductive tape that from where I can trigger certain electronic effects, and not only on and off, but also have like slides that I can use for dynamics or speed of whatever is happening at that point. So it's basically the electronics, the extended snare drum with electronics built in that I can control, which are then coming out of 4 other snare drums, which are in the room with transducers built in to them. So I'm playing, but the sound is not coming only from my snare drum, but it's like 4 different snare drums in the room that are also functioning basically as speakers. So you get like the spatialization, is that how you say it? Of the sound in again a church in this case, in Cologne, that I'm going to perform it, and so that's basically what it's going to be. Like 5 snare drums and the extended snare drum extended with a lot of electronics.
How composed is the piece, and how improvised is the piece?
It started out basically as a completely improvised piece, but now it's much more. I wouldn't. It's still pretty open, so it's not written down like any notes or something that I need to do. But like form-wise, it's kind of pretty steady. Like, okay, we're gonna start with this, then we go to that, and then we go to that, and then we go to that. How I get there, that's up to me. So it's still kind of like an improvisation, how I get from part A to B. But the parts in itself are kind of clear, like, so start off with reeds and go to drumsticks or stuff like that. And so I would say it's still pretty open, but not like, okay, do whatever you want. Here's the drum and have fun. So it's a little bit more structured, I would say. So, yeah.
What do you look for in a collaborator?
First of all, for me, it's a very personal thing, what I'm doing right now. So first of all, it's that I like the person. And that sounds maybe really weird because it's, it has nothing to do with the music, but that to me, it's, it's so personal what I'm doing that I don't want to just randomly work with everybody. So so that's the first thing. And the other thing is I want to be challenged. I think I guess you also know that, like, if you improvise a lot, you tend to, like music in general, you tend to do the same things all over again, and you always are searching for this excitement. And it doesn't matter, for me at least, how great or challenging the sounds are. When I've played, when I just came back from a tour, for example, playing several days of concerts, and and at a certain point you get kind of bored of yourself because it's always the same thing. So and I love collaborators, and doesn't even mean like composers. It can also be like inspirational musicians, that really challenge you to think differently, and that make you think differently, because they make choices in their music or their composition that you just you can't do what you always do. You have to figure out a way to do it differently, and that's definitely something I'm looking for. People that inspire me, people that have, in a certain kind of way, maybe the same approach to music, but still make me do things differently. Yeah. So, for example, I'm actually doing a trio concert, and also recording with Weston Olensky and Nick Dunstan in September, and they are both going to play banjo, and I'm going to play snare drum. So I think that's going to be awesome, because I mean, I love Weston. He's one of my favorite musicians, and Nick is also amazing, and both will be in Berlin then. Nick is already in Berlin, and Weston is going to move there, and that was I'm already looking forward to that so much, because I'm sure that's going to change my musical life for sure. It sounds maybe really dramatic, but I'm pretty sure that's going to happen, because that's going to be a super exciting project, and I'm pretty sure I have to come up with new ways of playing, because they will probably throw some things at me musically that I have to deal with, so in a good way. Yeah.
So in a trio that you've played like with Tone, how long have you been playing with them?
I think we did like the first couple of concerts like 8 years ago or something, and then we didn't do that much like intensively since 3 years again. Yeah.
So in a
3 or
group
4
like
years.
that, oh sorry, in a group like that, when you've been playing with someone for a while, how do you keep things feeling new? Is it just that you're all also playing with other people and then you bring new ideas back to the group, or do you have specific ways that you try to keep things fresh?
It's definitely, we all play with many different people, so we bring in new ideas, and we try to meet regularly, and also improvise together, just to have different concepts. Like, hey, I'm interested in this right now. Let's try this and this and this, and see how that works or not. So that's one thing. But also, like having a composer like Christian Wolf write a piece for us, which also means he also forces us to think differently and think out of that box that we kind of got into, because we play so much together. And so it's either becoming inspired by a piece that's written for us, or become inspired by other musicians, or something we heard, or a record that we love, or sometimes it's not even music. It can also be whatever, so Holland, or the nature, the flatlands in the Netherlands or something. I don't know. Can be a lot of different things. Yeah. So
I have one more question about your project with Viola, and that's like, so if this piece is really site specific and requires 4 snare drums set up specifically in the room, how do you practice something like that? I know that you just did a residency with her and you probably were immersed in it, but between now and when I know you're performing it at the end of May or recording it, what do you
yeah.
do in the meantime to work through the ideas?
Well, we meet quite a lot, so we have the luxury to really work on the piece. So it's not that I have so much alone time to work on that piece and then practice it. So it's really, we have the luxurious position that we have funding, and Germany is in that way a pretty amazing country, and so we have the means to just meet a lot and just work on the piece. So in this case, for example, she's coming next week to Cologne, so we're going to work on 3 days again, and we've been doing that for, I don't know, a couple of months. Like every couple of weeks she's coming over, I go to Berlin and work on a piece for several days. So that's basically also how I practice. And the last thing we did was the residency at Akademie der Künste in Berlin. and it was basically the same thing, just sitting down. And in that case, we really had the electronic studio for ourselves, so we had like all these, not the snare drums, but really the speakers to really figure out the spatialization with a clean sound. How does that work, and how does it work later with the snare drums, and what's the difference, and does it still work in the same way? So just having like this possibility to just check out stuff, and but doing it together. So I haven't practiced the piece by myself, because I think it works the best when she's there and just work together on it. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for chatting with us this morning and talking about your practice. It's been really cool.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and I really enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun, and I really hope we get to see each other live again someday, and yeah, and play. That will be awesome. Yeah,
That'd be great. Are
yeah,
you planning to go back to Darmstadt again in the future?
probably. It depends always on my schedule, but I definitely want to go there again and definitely play again. I mean, uh, it's a nice experience. It's Darmstadt is something special, I guess. And I've never done like the whole what is it, 2 weeks or a week, but um, but last time I was there, I think like 2 days when I that was when we also met, when I played with Nicola. And I think that's great, just hanging with people and playing. And so I'm definitely gonna visit again. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So
Totally. Well, I hope we get a chance to meet again and maybe play together as well.
yeah, definitely. I would love to, for sure. Yeah. So yeah.
Thanks, Etienne. This was really interesting.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks.